I'm Shasta Darlington. I'm CNN's Brazil bureau chief. I'm here in a place called Praça Mauá, or also known as the Olympic Boulevard, just a couple of hours before the opening ceremony of the 2016 Summer Games. I'm here because this has been turned into a live site, a kind of fan zone, where they're going to broadcast the opening ceremony on some screens behind me and around here. And I'm just going to step off this box and talk for a sec so you can see what's behind me. This place was actually built for the Olympics. It used to be a highway overpass. They literally blew it up, and then they built this park here with some museums, with a new tram, some huge graffiti murals. So this is the Olympic Boulevard, and let's see, we're waiting for some questions, so please do send your questions here. There are definitely hundreds, maybe thousands of people beginning to gather here for the opening ceremony, and this will be a test not only of whether or not Rio can pull off that opening ceremony, really the beginning of the Olympics, but also whether or not they can fill up these spaces. Brazilians have been so ambivalent about the Olympic Games at this point. Of course, when they won their bid to host the Games back in 2009, there was a lot of enthusiasm. But since then, Brazil has gotten mired in its worst recession in recent history. We're in our second year of recession, and there's a lot of political chaos. So according to the last poll, only 16% of Brazilians were really excited about these games. So this will be a test of how many people are turning out and tuning in. Let's see. There is a question, does it smell strange there or just normal? That would be a really strange question if we weren't on Guanabara Bay, which, as some people may know, is the bay where the sailing events will be held. It won't be right here; it'll be in another spot in the bay, but it often does smell very bad. Right now, it smells just fine. Thank you for your question, Randy. Again, I'll just remind you where I am. This place is called the Olympic Boulevard. It used to be a highway overpass, which they blew up so that they could build this pretty spectacular cultural center here. Tonight, what they're doing is they're broadcasting the opening ceremony on big screens around the square so that people can watch it for free. Let's see. James asks, are any of the police on strike? Not here in Rio. In fact, we saw a big contingent walking through here on our drive to this site. The corners were the streets were lined with soldiers. We came along one of the main roads that also leads to the opening ceremony in the Maracanã Stadium. So I think for people who aren't from here, and even if you are, the amount of security out on the streets is impressive. That doesn't mean it will prevent all kinds of violent crime or any other incidents, but you certainly get the sense that the security is out in force. There's supposed to be about 85,000 police and soldiers and firefighters involved in securing these Olympics, brought from around the country. That's more than double what we saw in London. Of course, to be fair, in London they didn't have the problems with violent crime that Rio does. Any Olympic city has to be wary of the possibility of a terror attack, but on top of that here, there are very high rates of robbery and even murder, so it was important to have these police out in force. Molly asks, what time will the actual ceremony start? That would be 8 p.m. local, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I don't know where you are, Molly, but do the math. Jorge says, hi Shasta, do you think we Brazilians are nice people? So that would make you a Jorge. I love Brazilians. I live here. I think they're extremely welcoming, extremely gracious. And I think one of the exciting things about the Olympic Games actually starting is that Brazilians can't help being friendly to visitors, opening their doors. And I think with all of the international tourists arriving, you really are going to see Brazilians putting on their best face, even though they are facing so many of their own problems. As I mentioned, the recession, political chaos, a lot of time, energy, and money being spent on a global sporting event when there are problems with their health system and their education system, when police have been on strike. And yet, again, Brazilians are just a lovely, warm, and welcoming people. And I think the 500,000 tourists who are expected to come in here will agree with me. Let's see. Sarah Horton asks, are you worried about the security being in a big crowd? We are being very vigilant. We're a big group here with between cameramen, producers, and security detail. And yes, we're keeping a very close eye on all of our gear and being careful despite all of the security out on the streets. Tim Nedoba asks, are Olympics as much of a disaster as they're being reported to be by the media? I think there have been more challenges to these games than any games in recent history. You can't deny that. Some of the issues I do think got exaggerated in whether or not they're a risk or they're a threat to the Olympics. And Zika is one that I always mention. The Zika virus here is dangerous. It is a long-term problem that Brazil is going to have to grapple with. But right now in Rio, we are in the winter. It tends to be chilly, cold at night, maybe heating up during the day, but there aren't a whole lot of mosquitoes. And according to reports, research done by the university here, you have a chance 1 in 500,000 of getting the Zika virus if you're visiting Rio. So I think that's one issue that there has been too much focus on. That, again, doesn't mean that this won't be a recurring problem in Brazil when we get back into the summer months. Andrea Keltner asks if the stadium and surrounding areas will be used after the games. I think Rio's done something very different than what we've seen in other Olympic Games. There is no spectacular single stadium. They're repurposing some of their stadiums. Athletics or track and field will be in a repurposed stadium. The opening ceremony will be in a totally different stadium, the very famous football or soccer stadium Maracanã. They did build brand new stadiums out in the main Olympic Park for everything from fencing to gymnastics. Those, they say, will be repurposed. Some of them are being broken down and turned into schools. Others will be used as training facilities for young athletes. I think we have to wait and see how it goes afterwards. You can have a lot of big promises, but we'll have to follow up and make sure that they really do what they say they're going to do with them. Let's see. Heather asks, are there still a lot of unsold tickets for events? I'm surprised at how many tickets are still available. Organizers are trying to put a positive spin on this. They say they've made their budget goals. They've made all the money they planned on making because they've sold the high-end tickets, but there are still 20% of tickets that are unsold. That seems like an incredibly high number to me, more than 1 million tickets. If I weren't standing here reporting, I would no doubt be going out and buying more tickets myself, but it really is a high number, especially when you compare it to London. Let's see, Karen Sparks asks, do you feel safe there? For the most part, I think, again, if you're vigilant right now, there is so much security out on the streets that you run less risk than you did even a month or two ago. Rio has a chronic and historic problem with violent crime, but it was getting better over the last decade. I think basically with the financial crisis of the last year and a half, the last 2 years, combined with a sort of experimental policing problem that may or may not have worked, we saw a real breakdown in recent months. So there were more murders, there were more robberies, and the violent crime figures really started to spike. And I think in the months leading up to the Olympics, there was a lot of concern. But we knew all along that as soon as we got close enough to the games, they were going to be bringing in all these reinforcements. So in that sense, I feel a lot safer than I did a month or two ago. And what Brazilians will tell you is, yes, they've got to deal with violent crime, but they don't have the history of terrorism, the homegrown terror networks that some cities in Europe do, for example. So while they have been training heavily for those working with international agencies, holding anti-terror drills with the French SWAT teams, there is the sense that that is less of a worry here than it might be in other European cities, for example. Let's see, Randy Mathias asks us if all the venues got completed on time. They were largely completed on time. The velodrome was a real question mark, but while they missed the deadline for the first test event, they did finally get in a test event. I think the bigger question as far as venues are concerned are the water venues. You didn't have to build that much, but when Rio won its bid to host these games 7 years ago, they said they were going to clean up the extremely polluted waters, the Guanabara Bay where the sailing is being held, the lagoon where the rowing is being held, and even the officials admit that they did not deliver on that promise. They call it a missed opportunity. So at this point, still only half of all of the houses in the state of Rio de Janeiro are connected to a sewage system. That means you got a whole lot of sewage flowing into those waterways. We've spoken to rowers who tell us the lagoon is cleaner than it was. Sailors have some pretty, horrific stories to tell. But the athletes themselves also say they don't want to switch venues. They've been training here for 2 years. Switching venues, especially a sailing venue, would only be beneficial for the Brazilians who know these waters better. And they're willing to take the risks. They're going for gold. Let's see, last question here. Danny Ho, is there a military presence around the venue for the opening ceremonies? Yes, there's a mixture of police and military. They definitely had some problems even a week ago. The idea was they were going to hire an independent security contracting group to do the screening at the venues. In the end, that contractor allegedly failed to hire enough people, so they fired them last minute, moved an elite national police force in to do some of the screening. But there have been reports that even then they didn't have enough people, so they're bringing retired officers back onto the force to do the screening. We haven't independently confirmed that, but certainly the venues are very heavily secured, but that doesn't mean they've been free of problems. Anyway, I would like to thank everyone for tuning in and joining us here along the Olympic Boulevard as we get ready to watch the opening ceremony for free on these big screens, along with all of the Brazilians who've turned out. That will be in about 2.5 hours' time. I'm Shasta Darlington, CNN's Bureau Chief. Thanks again for watching.